Today we're going to take a look at the best champions that you can play in every single role in patch 12.23 of the preseason. Now there's still plenty of familiar faces tearing up the rift and a fair few new ones as well. So let's cover all the different champions you can play to win more games in ranked in preseason, get that MMR ready for the new season 13. And we're not going to hang about and jump straight into the first role we're going to talk about, which is the mid lane. Kassadin is our first choice for you to play in that mid lane. Now he has been flying under the radar a little bit for quite a few patches now, but Riot introduced some really interesting changes this week. First off, they changed Kassadin's Q. It now has a better shield early game and it scales with less AP, which actually really helps him out in those difficult range matchups. Plus the shield is now actually granted when the Q is cast instantly, rather than when the projectile leaves Kassadin's hand. They also changed Kassadin's E quite a lot too. It no longer requires you to actually get stacks in order to cast it, and instead when allies and enemies cast around you, it just reduces its cooldown rather than giving you those stacks. Obviously it's got a higher base cooldown because of this, but it actually feels so much better. And all it's taken for Kassadin to be so much better is a few quality of life changes. And so far already Kassadin's win rate has nearly gone up by around 2.5 to 3% at the majority of ranks. We all know just how good Kassadin can be in the late game, but these changes have made his early game so much more tolerable, which in turn has made him more consistent. And when you partner Kassadin and consistency in the same sentence, it's pretty terrifying. The mobility and damage this champion can pump out throughout the later stages of the game is seriously scary, and I'd definitely recommend you guys to give him another try this patch or even ban him. He's getting played a lot more since these changes, and this is only going to increase as well as people realise just how good his win rate is. If you want to keep up to date with the best builds and runes and everything else you need to know about Kassadin or any other champion, then make sure you click the link in the description and download our brand new free desktop app. We've recently given it a massive upgrade, and there's so many new features you can use to help rank up in League of Legends, from summoner spell tracking to tier list scouting and champion select. Don't miss out and see it all for yourself. Now despite the Hydra nerfs, Zed is still one of the best mid laners in the game. Zed was already really strong before Hydra got buffed though, so it's absolutely no surprise to still see him in the top tiers even though that item is not quite as good now. Bruisers and assassins are generally having a pretty good time at the moment. Although the buffs to Sunfire Cape this week have definitely made tanks a lot better, which does make Zed a little bit weaker, and he's not quite as much of a free win because of it. But to be honest, the stats don't lie. Zed is sitting at the highest ban rate in the game across the majority of ranks right now, with nearly 60% in some elo brackets. Zed has always been one of these champions that gets banned often. A lot of people just don't like playing against him, and it's not really too difficult to imagine why. If he gets fed throughout the lane phase, he's going to turn into a bit of a mid-game monster. He's going to look for those isolated targets in side lanes getting farm, and he's just going to repeatedly take them down and make his lead even bigger. Whatever role you main, I definitely recommend brushing up on your Zed counter picks, because no matter if he's a bit weaker or still just as strong, people are still playing a lot of it. Our third and final mid lane pick to play this patch is actually Akshan. Now he definitely doesn't have quite as many games as Zed and not Kassadin either, but he's performing so well in the mid lane at the moment. Akshan actually has a little bit of a unique playstyle in the mid lane. He can be a really dominant early game lane bully, but he's also susceptible to long range poke too. But despite this, he has loads of different ways that he can come out on top in loads of different matchups. And if the lane really is that bad, he just presses W, gets that stealth up and roams and spins around the map with the Z. It honestly can feel like you're playing against one of those stealthy mid lane switches as well, because you never really know if you're safe if he goes missing from lane. Even if he's just chilling under his tower or his reset, if you don't see him, you have to respect it, because if he comes in swinging, you're going to regret overextending. Akshan is really consistent throughout all stages of the game too. As we've already mentioned, his lane phase is very strong, his mid game can be exceptional, and his late game scaling is really good too, although he does have to play a bit like an assassin here. He's very squishy, so if you're playing him you do need to be careful you don't get blown up, but if you come in at the right time you can revive your whole team and then get a Baron and win the game. Simple as that. Let's move into the jungle now, and there's loads of crazy new picks that are thriving in this patch so far. Maokai's buffs have really helped him out. Rammus and Dr. Mundo are seriously popping off too, but we do expect some nerfs imminently for those two. One champion that is still dominating the jungle though is Udyr. Yep, with no nerfs coming into Udyr in patch 12.23, he's still one-shotting people with just one item. Now you can still play tanky AP Udyr, but to be honest, the damage build focusing on your Q is way more dominant. Like you can genuinely just one-shot people on repeat. Every time you see them, you Prowler's Claw, you press your Q again to awaken it, and they literally die in a matter of seconds. If you're a jungle main and you haven't really tried this yet, I definitely recommend you give it a go. It does get banned fairly often, but people still let them slip through champion select every now and again. And every time you play it or play against it, you realise just how strong it is, and we're really surprised he didn't get nerfed this patch. Generally speaking, after your Prowler's Claw, you can just build any kind of variation of damage items. Hydra is obviously one of the most popular choices, and you got things like Death's Dance, the Collector, Edge of Night, things like that, and you just walk around one-shotting everybody you see and tearing through objectives too. I feel kind of bad encouraging more people to play Udyr, but to be honest, it is just so strong, so give it a go. Our next pick for one of the best junglers in the game that you can play is still Elise. We've covered this champion quite a few times in recent videos, and with still no nerfs coming in, she's still in a fantastic position. Nothing's really changed when it comes to her items. She still goes for things like Night Harvester, into Shadow Flame, Zhonya's, Void Staff, Death Cap, tons of damage, and with that Q being an execute in spider form, it's actually so easy to burst people down no matter how much health they've got. And if you do manage to get a few kills early game, you get a bit fed, you start snowballing into the mid game, you deal so much damage, and you turn into a bit of an assassin. Your repel allows you to cover a lot of distance and escape or chase whoever you want, and as long as you're on point with your cocoons, you just can't really go wrong. Elise does take a bit of an aggressive playstyle to pull off though. You can't just walk around full clearing and hoping you get carried. You need to be doing stuff on this champion. You need to be walking around, setting up dives, setting up plays, getting those early ganks in, and getting fed sooner rather than later. Just like any other early game jungler, Elise does fall off. She doesn't fall off completely off the face of the earth, but you still need to remember that you need to make your impact early to mid game. Get as many ganks off as you can, secure those dragons, get a few rifts, take down those plates, and turn those plays into an easy win for you and your teammates. Our third and final jungle pick to play in this patch is Kindred. Now Kindred is vastly different to so many other junglers, and she does have a pretty high skill ceiling too. She's not the easiest champion in the game to play, so she definitely has a better success rate in the higher ranks. Kindred is all about her passive. Securing those passive marks from enemy champions and jungle camps is the way to play this champion. It is literally the bread and butter of her playstyle, and if you don't do it, she's just nowhere near as good. But if you can make the best use of this passive, you scale so much better than 90% of other junglers in the game. I mean, you are essentially a secondary AD carry with a ton of mobility, massive range, and of course your ultimate too, which is a game changer. If you can pull off your ultimate in the perfect scenario, you can not only save yourself, you can save your whole team, you can even stall objectives for you to secure them or steal them, and understanding and mastering all the different ways you can use this ultimate and the rest of Kindred's kit is pivotal when it comes to mastering this champion. Now all of that complicated stuff aside, you are basically an auto attack based champion. So if you've played a bit of AD carry in the past, you understand how to attack move, you understand how the jungle works too. Kindred's potential in general is just mad. So if you are looking for a bit of a different jungler to pick up and learn, try Kindred. Let's move down to those AD carries now. And first off, we've got Caitlyn, the AD carry that everybody thinks they are godlike god. Caitlyn is very simple to pick up. She has a really long auto range, you can bully people down with those headshots and those isolated Qs, but actually her skill ceiling and her mastery level is actually much higher than people realise. To perfect this champion takes a lot of practice. You need to nail those trap placements and know how to do all of those different combos with your Q and your E and your auto attacks and your headshots and your traps, and then of course your Gale Force and your ultimate as well if you've taken that mythic item. Caitlyn's mid game still is her weakest point of the game, and it always probably will be. She needs to get fed in that lane phase or at least go even or slightly ahead so that she can actually play to her strengths and do what she does best, which is rotating around the map and taking every single tower that exists. Caitlyn is fantastic if she does get fed and spikes early though. The long range burst damage she can deal is mental if she has those items sooner rather than later. And the main thing you really have to be focused on is not getting behind. Caitlyn actually works best with either sustaining or poking supports that can basically make her laning even stronger than it already is. But she does work well with most supports and those aggressive ones too. You're definitely going to need to know how to keep those matchups at a good range for you and know how to auto space correctly. But if you can do all of this, Caitlyn is in a really good spot at the moment. So if you've forgotten about her recently, now is time to revisit her. Our second pick will not surprise you, and it's going to be Kai'Sa. Now Kai'Sa has just been such a great AD carry for such a long time now. She has periods of being completely broken and a little bit underwhelming. But at the moment, she's just one of the most reliable and versatile AD carries you can play. A good Kai'Sa player can literally pick it into any game. Yes, you may have those lanes that aren't quite as favourable, but as long as you can farm efficiently and you can scale into the mid game, evolve those abilities and start slapping, you're going to be just fine. She does have a ton of different build paths to go for though. Honestly, the variety of items being picked by Kai'Sa at the moment is mental. Kraken Slayer seems to be the best mythic to go for. But then after that, you've got a load of different options. Some people like to go the on-hit build with Blade of the Ruin King and Guinsoo's Rage Blade. Some people like to go Hydra, Infinity Edge, Phantom Dancer. There's just so many different choices that you can build in so many different games. And learning all of these different things and learning which one is optimal in whichever game you're playing is definitely something you're going to have to look into. People just simply don't put enough respect on Kai'Sa's name though. And what I mean by this is they just completely underestimate her every single time. They think she's pretty average in lane, but actually if she plays it well enough, she has a ton of burst damage. And she can be partnered with literally any support in the game. Aggressive champions like Pyke? No problem. Crowd control monsters like Rel? Perfect. Sustaining powerhouses like Soraka are also fantastic, and even those pokey mages like Zyra work too. If you're trying to find an AD carry that you can master and play in every single game no matter what, you can't really go too wrong with Kai'Sa. There are so many different AD carries you can play right now and do really well on. Obviously Twitch is still performing fantastically well, you've got Samira who can pop off in certain games, and if you're good enough with those skill shots, Ezreal is actually super underrated, especially at higher ranks. But our third and final AD carry, which is one of the best champions in the game for you to play right now, if you're good enough, is Draven. It's probably quite rare that we ever have a video like this and Draven isn't a possibility. But at the moment, the higher rank you go, Draven just wins more and more games. And it's fairly simple as to understand why. He has some of the highest damage to offer from any AD carry in the early game. Those axes seriously hurt. And if he does get a kill on you after racking up those passive stacks, he's going to cash in and walk back to lane with a completed item at the 7-minute mark. There is just no other AD carry in the game that can get this much gold this quickly and then start slapping with it. You can just force 2v2s every time you get back to lane, the jungler comes along and you take them down too. You force dragon fights, you take every objective because you're just so fed, and as long as you've got the mechanics to catch those axes, stay alive and deal big deeps, you're going to have a great time. Draven is all about being ahead of the rest of the game though, so he does naturally fall off in the late game. He's got relatively low range unless he gets a rapid fire cannon, so he is naturally going to be vulnerable to that crowd control and burst. But as long as you're playing around your summoner spells, your burst damage, and of course your positioning, well, the things you can pull off on this champion are mad. Draven does take some serious practice, especially when compared to some AD carries, and that catching axes mechanic does take some getting used to. But if you can perfect it, well, you're going to win a lot of games very quickly. Alright guys, well let's move down to those supports now. And starting off, we've got Nami. Nami Lucian is still one of the best lanes in the game, and the sheer amount of burst damage and snowball potential that this duo lane offers is beyond compare. If you go against a good Lucian Nami, it can feel impossible to play against. So if you and your duo buddy haven't tried it yet, please give it a go. It could be your catapult to getting you to that next ELO bracket. And remember, the more ELO you get in pre-season, the better your MMR is going to be going into season 13, which can seriously make the difference. As much as Lucian relies on Nami, Nami is just fine without it. Sounds like a pretty toxic relationship if you ask me. But the truth is, Nami is not very picky. She works well with pretty much any bot lane you can play. Whether it's other AD carries like Kai'Sa, Jhin, Ezreal, you name it, anyone will work. But also those cheesy bot laners like Brand as well. Nami's main strength is actually that burst damage that her E grants. One of Nami's best qualities is that E. This ability alone grants so much additional burst damage, and if your bot laner knows how to abuse this, it can be free kills. Then you've got a ton of CC with her bubble and her ultimate, some movement speed from her passive, and sustain and poke with her W2, all of which is super useful throughout all stages of the game. Nami is exceptionally squishy though, so you are going to have to be really careful rotating around the map for vision. But as long as you stay near your teammates, you buff them up, you heal them up, and you send out as much CC as you can, you just can't go wrong with her this patch. Packing a relatively similar playstyle to Nami, we've got Janna. And you should all know by now that Janna is simply just one of the best champions you can play in the whole game right now. She's got one of the highest win rates and she has had this for such a long time. Janna might not offer quite as much damage and burst that Nami does. I mean, let's be honest, she doesn't really offer any damage, but what she does do is boost the AD carry's damage instead. And her sheer amount of peel and protection is just way better than any other champion. In lane, she's got a little bit of poke with that W and of course the slow as well. She's got tornadoes to stop any kind of fight attempts or set up ganks instead. But it's that E shield that really makes the difference by boosting her AD carry's damage. And once Janna does get her ultimate, she becomes almost impossible to gank if she saves it and uses it perfectly. Throughout games though, Janna just offers so much utility in team fights. And as long as you're wary of where you are and not getting caught, there's just so much you can do to make the difference and win more fights and win more games. Janna is just that support right now that you can simply just pick every game. If you enjoy her, she's so good that why are you playing anything else? Our third and final support is one that you may not expect but is actually doing so well at pretty much every single rank. Sona. Sona is the OG pokey healy support that everybody just loves having on their team. She's so easy to play, but she just has so much utility to offer. And as long as you can sit back behind your AD carry, spam those heals, spam that poke with your Q, and keep everyone topped up with their movement speed, you're just going to be so impactful for very little effort. One thing that does require a bit more thinking though is that Sona ultimate. And the difference this ultimate can make in 2v2s in the lane phase, in those team fights around dragons or barons, if you can pull it off correctly and land that big ultimate on multiple targets, well, you can simply make the difference with it. If you partner up Sona with someone else that has good range, good poke, and can stay in lane forever, like a Caitlyn for example, well, this is going to be a match made in heaven. And as long as you're conscious of playing safe, you're not getting hooked by blitzcrank, you're not getting ganked by the enemy jungler on repeat, well, you're just going to be completely unplayable in lane. Sona has been one of the longest standing support champions in the game that has not really changed that much over the years. And if you need a bit of a reliable, easy to play, kind of consistent support to go for, then pick up Sona again. Finally, let's move into that top lane. And there has been a little bit of a shift in this role this patch, but not quite as much as you may have been hoping for. Hydra is not quite as broken and tanks are a little bit less useless. But one champion that's still popping off is Fiora. Yes, that's right, if you are a top lane main in pre-season, you're probably already playing or banning Fiora. And in patch 12.23, nothing has really changed too much apart from Hydra being not quite as oppressive. It doesn't really matter too much though because Fiora is still one of the best, if not the best top laners in the game at the moment. With some of the highest games played across the majority of ranks, Fiora is one of the most popular champions you could play up there. She is unbelievably consistent right now, and it's easy to see why. One of her biggest strengths is already dueling and fighting most other top laners in 1v1s, from as early as level 1 all the way way through for the rest of the lane phase. If she plays against the bruiser, it's quite often a skill matchup. If she plays against the tank, she can melt them with her true damage on those vitals. If they've got CC, she's got her parry. And when she gets 6, 90% of the time this means she can 1v1 them, no matter who they're playing. Throughout games, Fiora is the traditional split pushing bruiser in a side lane. She'll focus on taking down towers, bringing attention to her lane and either outplaying them or just getting away and wasting their time. This is historically one of the most recognizable easy ways to impact games from that top lane, especially if you're not really a team fighting champion and you don't really have too much CC to offer. Obviously if you're playing someone like Ornn who just wants to get stuck in a 5v5 and press that ultimate, then fair enough. But if you're playing Fiora, it's all about split pushing. And if you do decide to team fight, it's going to be cleaning up and flanking in the backline. Fiora is actually so much easier to play and to learn than most people realise. Yes, her skill ceiling is very high and it does take time to master her, but to pick her up and learn her initially is not that bad. So if you are fed up of banning it and want to give her a go, this is the time to try her. Finally, people have understood how to actually play and build Kassadin, and with a few buffs to tank items and a few nerfs to bruisers, he's now one of the best top laners in the game. The Sunfire Cape buffs have really helped this champion, especially obviously in those AD matchups. You get yourself a Jack-Show which feels like it was made for this champion, and then you get Sunfire steel caps and you just take so much damage and actually deal a fair bit too, because you actually scale with resistances. Kassadin can fight for what seems like forever. You get stuck into a duel or a team fight and you take so much damage and deal a fair bit yourself too. You have a ton of crowd control spamming those Qs, your Ws, and of course your ultimate as well. And when you do finally pull the trigger with that ultimate, you actually become a little bit godlike too. After those early items, you get things like Gargle, Stoneplate, Thornmail, Force of Nature. You stack up those resistances, you get stuck into team fights, peel, protect, dive, whatever you want to do, you can do it on this champion. And if you haven't tried him yet, please give him a go because he is so much fun. There are tons of other fantastic picks you can play in the top lane right now. Shen's still doing really well. You've got Darius, you've got Camille, Aatrox is still scary as ever, but it's actually Olaf that is going to take this third and final position. When it comes to tearing through tanks with his Q, stomping lanes to the point of no return, and just winning the game by rolling over entire teams, there's just no better than Olaf. Olaf is one of the only champions I've ever seen when they're not even that fed, sprint into an enemy team with his ghost, with his ultimate, and literally 1v5 and take pentakills. And I've actually seen this happen way too many times. You got a few different mythic choices to play with on Olaf. Stridebreaker is historically his favourite, then you got Gore Drinker, but actually it's Jack-Show that's statistically winning the most amount of games right now. After that you just build those AD bruiser items, Titanic Hydra, Death Stance, more of my Mortius, Sterak's Gauge. You deal a stupid amount of damage, but you also have so much survivability too. The thing about Olaf is you can play him into any enemy team comp. It doesn't matter how much crowd control they have, as long as they don't have too much range and mobility, you're not really going to have a problem. And unless they're picking 5 terrain champions like Trundle's Pillar and Anivia's Wall, they just can't stop you running at them. Olaf is just as effective in a side lane as he is in teamfights, as long as he has all of his cooldowns available. But often the best course of action to win games on Olaf is to get set up in a side lane and invite people to come and try and stop you, and then just outplay them even when they outnumber you. The one major thing about Olaf though is he needs to be ahead. His whole playstyle is all or nothing, running it down towards enemies and taking them down no matter what they throw at him. And if you are behind and super weak, you just can't really do anything. So if you learn those matchups and learn those limits, the amount of games you can solo carry on Olaf right now is a bit bonkers. Well, that's going to bring us to the end of our best champions to play for every single role in preseason patch 12.23. There are so many other champions you can play and do super well with right now, but if we were to sit here and talk about every single one of them, well, we'd probably be here till next Christmas. Remember guys, preseason is the period where you can boost your MMR, but it's also a period where you should be experimenting, learning new champions, and just having fun with the game. Because by the time the new season comes around, you want to be in the best position you could be in. Don't forget to click the link in the description and download our app and bring it with you into next game to get all of those fantastic features we have for you. Seriously, it's free, so what are you waiting for? Thanks everyone again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.